You were driving erratically back there. I'm going to need your license and registration.
Officer, I was moving at the same speed as every other vehicle in that area. The road was full of pedestrians from the graduation. Can you tell me specifically what you observed?
Sir, I don't explain my observations during a traffic stop. License and registration, I won't ask.
Officer Calvin Reese of the Crestwood University Police Department had spent 11 years deciding who belonged and who didn't. And on the afternoon of May 17th, he decided a black family in graduation gowns didn't. He drew his weapon on a mother, a lawyer, and 2 children on the side of a road he had no business stopping them on, told them he smelled marijuana in a car that smelled like pride and hard work, and began dismantling their graduation day 1 fabricated citation at a time. What Officer Reese didn't know, what nobody on that curb had told him yet, was that the man whose license he was holding had spent the last 3 years studying the exact laws Reese was violating, and that the federal judge who had sworn him in 2 hours earlier was still walking the same campus and was already on his way over. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. Here at DA Truth, if you believe that a law degree, a graduation gown, and a clean record should be enough to drive home in peace without a gun pointed at your family, hit the like button and subscribe to Deep Truth. Because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Crestwood University sits on 214 acres of red brick and Georgia pine in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, just 4 miles northwest of downtown. Established in 1923, it is one of the few private research universities in the South that has consistently ranked in the top 40 nationally for its School of Law. Its campus on Crestwood Boulevard is the kind of place that feels deliberately permanent. Iron gate entries, stone walkways worn smooth by 100 years of foot traffic, oak trees so old they have names. On any given weekday, the grounds move at the measured pace of academic life. But on graduation day, Crestwood transforms entirely. The paths fill up. The parking lots overflow onto side streets. Families spill out of Harmon Hall in every direction, trailing balloons and flower bouquets, and the particular joy that only comes from watching someone in your bloodline walk across a stage. May 17th was that day. The law school commencement had ended at 2:30 in the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, Crestwood Boulevard and the surrounding campus roads were operating at a crawl. Not because of any incident, not because of any violation, but because that is what happens when 2,000 people and their families attempt to leave the same campus at the same time. Pedestrians crossed mid-block. Parents pushed strollers between parked cars. Graduates still in full regalia stood in the middle of Aldridge Campus Drive taking photographs. Because Aldridge Campus Drive, with its oak canopy and stone entrance markers, is the photograph people come back to Crestwood for decades later to recreate. Traffic through that corridor on graduation afternoon moves at between 4 and 7 miles per hour. It always does. There is no other responsible speed. At 3:14 p.m., a silver 2021 Honda Pilot moved through the Aldridge Campus Drive corridor at exactly that speed. Behind the wheel was Harlan Solomon, 31 years old, Atlanta native, graduate of Crestwood University School of Law, class of 2025, as of approximately 2 hours and 44 minutes prior. Harlan had done his undergraduate work at Morehouse College 6 blocks away, graduated with honors in political science, and spent 1 year working as a paralegal at Strickland and Associates on Peachtree Street before returning to Crestwood for law school. He had finished in the top 12% of his class. His concentration was civil rights law. He was not any of that at 3:14 p.m. He was thinking about parking. Specifically, he was trying to remember whether he had turned left or right off of Magnolia Gate Drive when they arrived that morning, because the lot they'd parked in, Lot F, he was almost certain it was Lot F, was somewhere past the maintenance building, and the post-ceremony foot traffic had rearranged his memory of the route. His phone was mounted on the dash. He'd already typed in the campus address, but the GPS was cycling. He was moving slowly, carefully, the way a person moves when they are in a crowd and they are responsible for other people. In the back seat, 7-year-old Caden Solomon had his face pressed against the window watching a golden retriever being walked by a woman in a yellow dress. Next to him, 5-year-old Imani Solomon had fallen asleep against her booster seat buckle, her small mouth open, a graduation program she'd been holding since the ceremony still loosely in her hand. The program had Harlan's name on it. She had pointed to it every 10 minutes during the reception and told anyone standing near her that this was her brother. In the passenger seat, Camille Solomon, 44 years old, Harlan's mother, still wore her own gown. Not a graduation gown, a dress she had driven 40 minutes to Phipps Plaza to find 3 weeks ago, deep burgundy with a wrap at the waist. She had pressed it the night before. She had been up since 6 in the morning. She had cried twice during the ceremony. Once when Harlan's name was called, and once when Judge Harmon Solomon, her husband's older brother, had administered the oath. She was currently holding a corsage box in her lap and looking at her phone because her sister had sent 17 consecutive messages asking for photos, and she was trying to select the best one. It was, by every measure, an ordinary and happy afternoon. Calvin Reese was parked in a Crestwood University police cruiser at the corner of Aldridge Campus Drive and Magnolia Gate Drive, where the road bends slightly left and the oak canopy thickens enough to create a natural shadow across the lane. He had been posted at that intersection since noon as part of the university's standard graduation traffic detail. He was 38 years old and had worked Crestwood University PD for 11 years, the last 4 as a senior patrol officer. His personnel file, which would later become relevant, contained 2 sustained complaints for stops that produced no violations, and 1 letter of counseling for conduct during a noise call near the graduate housing complex on Birchwood Lane. None of those had resulted in formal discipline. He had learned early that formal discipline at a university police department, for an officer with his seniority, required a threshold of evidence that was difficult to reach. He saw the silver Honda Pilot come through the Aldridge Bend, and he watched it the way he watched certain cars. Not all cars, not randomly, but with a particular and practiced attention that had nothing to do with traffic violations, and everything to do with the decision he had already made before the car was close enough to read the plates. He watched it move through the pedestrian crossing at 4 miles per hour. He watched it pause for a woman pushing a stroller. He watched it continue, signaling properly, edging toward Magnolia Gate. There was nothing to see, which did not stop him. He pulled out behind the Honda Pilot at 3:14 p.m. without a radio call, without a dispatch notification, without any record of observing a violation, because he had not observed one. He activated his lights 30 seconds later, just past the Magnolia Gate intersection, in front of the small stone retaining wall where the class of 1987 had planted a magnolia that was now 30 feet tall. Inside the Honda, Camille looked up from her phone. Caden pulled his face from the window. Harlan checked his mirrors, confirmed the lights were for him, and pulled carefully to the right, coming to a complete stop against the curb in front of the Crestwood Campus Services Building at 1140 Aldridge Campus Drive. He put the car in park. He placed both hands on the steering wheel. He had learned to do that a long time before he ever set foot in a law school. Reese took his time getting out of the cruiser. He stood beside his door for a moment, surveying the vehicle, the way officers sometimes do when they want the person in the car to feel the weight. Then he walked to the driver's side window with the particular stride of a man who has already decided how this is going to go. Harlan lowered the window. "License and registration," Reese said. No greeting, no explanation. No, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" which is the question that at least creates the pretense of a reason existing. Harlan did not ask why. Not yet. He reached for his wallet with the deliberate, visible, narrated movements that black men learn not from driving school, but from survival. "I'm reaching into my left pocket, I'm opening my wallet. Here is my license." He handed it over. Camille opened the glove box carefully and retrieved the registration and insurance card, both current, and passed them to Harlan, who passed them to Reese. Reese looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked back at Harlan, then at the back seat, where Caden was now completely still and Imani was beginning to stir from sleep, blinking against the afternoon light. "You were driving erratically back there," Reese said. Harlan's jaw tightened. Around them, the graduation crowd continued to move. A group of graduates in full cap and gown crossed Aldridge Drive 20 feet away, laughing, not noticing. A family took a photograph in front of the magnolia tree. The afternoon held its ordinary warmth. "I was moving with traffic, officer," Harlan said. Calm, measured. The voice of a man who had spent 3 years learning how to keep his voice exactly that way inside a courtroom, and who understood, with the full weight of his education, that the courtroom had just arrived at his car window. Everyone on that road was moving at the same speed. Reese didn't respond to that. He looked at the license again. Then he walked back to his cruiser to run the plates. The plates came back clean. He sat in the cruiser for 4 minutes anyway. And when he got back out, he was not holding a warning slip. He was not holding a citation. He was not preparing to say everything checks out. You're free to go, the way the evidence in his hand required him to. He walked back to the driver's side window, and this time, one hand was resting on his belt in a way that had nothing to do with comfort, and everything to do with what he was about to say next. Calvin Reese already knew the plates were clean. He had sat in that cruiser for 4 minutes with a license that had no violations, a registration that was current, and an insurance card that had not expired. There was nothing in his hand that gave him a reason to stay. But he got out of that car anyway, walked back to the driver's side window, and what came out of his mouth next would follow him for the rest of his life. "I'm going to need everyone to step out of the vehicle." Harlan didn't move right away. Not out of defiance. Out of disbelief. He looked at Reese the way you look at someone who has just said something that doesn't connect to any reality you can identify. His license was clean, his registration was clean. The plates had come back with nothing. There was no traffic violation, no accident, no complaint. There was no reason on earth that justified what Reese had just asked. "Officer, on what basis?" Harlan asked. Reese's response was immediate. "I smell marijuana coming from this vehicle." That was the moment. That one sentence. Because anyone standing within 20 feet of that car on that afternoon would have told you exactly what it smelled like. Warm upholstery, the faint sweetness of the juice boxes in the backseat cup holders, and the floral edge of whatever perfume Camille had put on that morning. There was no marijuana. There had never been any marijuana. But Calvin Reese had used that line before, and it had always opened the door he needed it to open, and so he used it again. Harlan looked straight ahead for one breath. Then he turned to his mother. Camille was already looking at him, her corsage box still in her lap, her face completely still in the way that black mothers go still when they understand that the situation has just changed, and that stillness is the only safe response. She gave him one small nod. They hadn't rehearsed this. They didn't need to. Harlan opened his door slowly, both hands visible, and stepped out onto the curb. Camille came out on the passenger side. In the back seat, Caden unbuckled himself because he had watched his mother get out, and he followed her the way 7-year-olds follow their mothers. Automatically, without question. Imani woke up fully when the door opened beside her and she looked around at the street. At the officer, at her mother standing on the curb in her burgundy dress, and she started to cry. Not a tantrum cry, the kind of cry that comes from a child who doesn't have words for what she's sensing, but her body already knows something is wrong. Camille reached in and lifted Imani out, holding her against her chest. Imani buried her face in her mother's neck. Caden stood close to Camille's side without being told to. The 4 of them stood on the curb in front of the Crestwood Campus Services building, while Calvin Reese went back to his cruiser a second time. By now, the foot traffic on Aldridge Campus Drive had begun to slow. Graduates walking to their cars noticed the stop. Families who had just come from the same ceremony paused on the sidewalk. A man in a blue suit took out his phone and began recording. Then a woman in a yellow shawl did the same. Within 3 minutes, there were at least 9 people filming from the sidewalk and the grass median across the street, and none of them had been asked to stop by anyone because none of them were doing anything wrong. Reese came back out with latex gloves on. He opened the driver's side door and began searching the interior of the car. He went through the center console. He opened the glove box. which now sat empty since Camille had already handed him the documents from it. He checked under the front seats. He moved to the back seat and went through the door pockets. He found the juice boxes. He found a small backpack that belonged to Caden with a water bottle and a fruit snack inside. He found the spare graduation program that Camille had picked up as a second copy for the baby book. He found nothing else, because there was nothing else to find. He moved to the trunk. Harlan watched him from the curb with his hands loosely at his sides. His jaw was set. His eyes followed every movement Reese made with the focused, cataloging attention of a man who was already building a record in his head. Time, location, action, sequence. The same way he had been trained to build a record in a courtroom. Camille kept her hand moving slowly on Imani's back. Caden had found a crack in the sidewalk and was staring at it with the intense concentration children use when they're trying not to look at something that scares them. Reese spent 6 minutes going through the trunk. He found a folded emergency blanket, a tire pressure gauge, and a plastic bin with jumper cables and a flashlight. He closed the trunk. He took the gloves off. He walked back to where the family stood. He had found nothing. Not a trace. Not a seed. Not a smell that any other person at that scene had been able to detect from the moment he first claimed it. The legal basis for the stop was gone. The legal basis for the search was gone. The only thing that should have happened next was a direct apology and an immediate end to the stop. Instead, Reese reached for his citation book. "I'm citing you for erratic driving and failure to maintain lane," he said, not looking up from the page. Harlan's voice stayed level. "I was driving at 4 miles an hour in a graduation crowd. Every car on that road was doing the same thing. You have no basis for either of those citations." Reese kept writing. "And I want your badge number," Harlan said. "Right now." Reese looked up at that. For just a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt, not hesitation, but the particular irritation of a man who is used to these stops ending before anyone asks that question. He recited his badge number in a flat tone and went back to the citation book. Camille shifted Imani to her other hip. Imani had stopped crying but was still holding on with both hands, her small fingers gripping the back of her mother's dress. The burgundy dress that had been pressed the night before. The dress chosen for a celebration. Camille looked out at the people filming from across the street, and then looked back at her son standing on the curb next to her, and the particular grief of that image. Her child, her graduate, 2 hours removed from the proudest moment of their family's life, standing on a sidewalk while a man with no evidence wrote lies onto a citation form, settled into her face and stayed there. Harlan did not raise his voice. He did not move from where he was standing. He understood, at a level that went well beyond instinct and straight into training, that everything happening right now was being recorded, that every word and every action was going into the record, and that the record was going to matter. What he did not know yet was how quickly, and for how many reasons, it was going to matter. Reese finished writing and tore the first citation from the book. He held it out toward Harlan. And that was the moment that Sylvia Jones, Associate Dean of Student Affairs at Crestwood University School of Law, stopped walking on the sidewalk 20 feet away and turned to look at what was happening to one of her graduates. Sylvia Jones had been at Crestwood University for 19 years. She had watched hundreds of graduation days come and go from that campus, and she knew every face in the law school's graduating class the way a person knows faces they have invested real time in. She was not passing by accidentally. She had been walking to her car after the reception when she noticed the lights, noticed the family on the curb, and then noticed who the family was. She walked over without hesitation. "Officer?" Her voice was professional, but it carried. "I'm Sylvia Jones, Associate Dean of Student Affairs, Crestwood School of Law. Can you tell me what's happening here?" Reese didn't look up from his citation book immediately. When he did, he gave her the kind of glance that communicated she was an interruption and nothing more. "Ma'am, this is a traffic stop. I need you to step back." Sylvia did not step back. She looked at Harlan, then at Camille holding Imani, then at Caden pressed against his mother's side, And then she looked back at Reese with an expression that had moved past professional concern and into something quieter and more deliberate. "That man," she said, nodding toward Harlan, "graduated from this law school 2 hours ago. I watched him cross that stage. I know who he is and I know who his family is, and I need you to tell me right now what legal basis you have for this stop." Reese's pen stopped moving. It was a small thing, just a pause. But everyone on that curb noticed it because it was the first moment since he had activated his lights that Calvin Reese had stopped moving forward and started calculating instead. He looked at Sylvia. He looked at Harlan. Something was shifting in his understanding of the situation, but his arrogance had not yet caught up to his instincts, and so he made the decision that arrogant men consistently make when they feel the ground moving. He doubled down. "Ma'am, I have probable cause. I smell marijuana and I observed erratic driving. I need you to step back or I will ask you to leave this area." Sylvia Jones looked at him for a long moment. Then she took out her phone. She made one call. It lasted 40 seconds. She said 3 sentences, listened, said 2 more, and hung up. She looked at Reese once more, and then she looked down the sidewalk toward the east entrance of Harmon Hall, where the post-ceremony reception had been winding down for the last 40 minutes. Everyone followed her gaze. At the far end of the sidewalk, moving at the steady and unhurried pace of a man who has spent decades in rooms where everyone waits for him to speak, was Federal Judge Harmon Solomon. He was still in his robes. Not his judicial robes. The ceremonial robes he had worn to administer the oath to his nephew's graduating class 2 hours earlier. He had not changed because he had not had time to change, and also because after Sylvia's call reached him at the reception table, changing clothes was not a priority. He was 63 years old. He had served on the federal bench for 14 years. Before that, he had practiced law in Atlanta for 16 years, the last 8 as a partner at one of the oldest civil rights firms in Georgia. He walked with the particular gravity of someone who does not need to move fast because the room always adjusts to them, not the other way around. The crowd on the sidewalk parted without being asked. He reached the stop, looked at his nephew standing on the curb, looked at Camille holding Imani, looked at Caden, and then turned his eyes to Calvin Reese. He did not raise his voice. He did not introduce himself with any performance or theater. He simply said in a tone that was flat and final and gave no room for negotiation whatsoever, "What are the grounds for this stop?" Reese opened his mouth. Then he made the mistake of actually looking at the man standing in front of him. The robes, the bearing, the 19 people filming from the sidewalk, the associate dean standing 4 feet away, and the law school graduate whose license was still in his hand. And for the first time in 11 years of doing exactly this, Calvin Reese had no answer that was going to hold. He said the only thing he had. "I observed erratic driving and I detected the smell of marijuana from the vehicle." Judge Solomon looked at the citation book. He looked at the latex gloves Reese had discarded on the hood of the Honda. He looked at the family on the curb. He looked back at Reese. "You searched this vehicle." It was not a question. "Yes, sir, based on probable." "You found nothing." Again, not a question. Because Harlan was still standing there, uncuffed, uncharged, holding a citation for a moving violation instead of being placed under arrest. The math was visible to everyone present. Reese said nothing. Judge Solomon took out his phone and made a call that lasted less than 2 minutes. When he hung up, the citations in Reese's hand were already worthless. The Crestwood University police chief was on his way, and Calvin Reese was still standing on Aldridge Campus Drive holding a citation book and a pair of used latex gloves, surrounded by cameras, with no story left that was going to save him. The graduation crowd watched in complete silence. Crestwood University Police Chief Donald Atwell arrived at the Aldridge Campus Drive stop 11 minutes after Judge Solomon made his call. He pulled up in an unmarked white SUV, got out, and took in the full scene in about 4 seconds. The family on the curb, the cameras, the judge in his ceremonial robes, the associate dean, and Calvin Reese standing beside a car he had already searched and found nothing in, holding citations he had already written for violations he had not actually witnessed. Atwell walked straight to Judge Solomon first. They spoke for 3 minutes. Atwell did not look at Reese during those 3 minutes. Not once. That alone told everyone watching exactly how this was going to go. Then Atwell walked to Reese. Whatever was said between them was said quietly enough that the cameras didn't catch the words. What the cameras did catch was Reese handing over his citation book. They caught Atwell taking the written citations and voiding them on the spot. They caught Reese unclipping his badge and placing it into Atwell's open hand. And they caught Calvin Reese walking to his cruiser, getting in, and driving off of Aldridge Campus Drive for the last time as a Crestwood University police officer. The suspension was immediate and without pay. Harlan stood on that curb and watched it happen without saying a word. Camille exhaled slowly, still holding Imani, who had fallen back into a quiet drowsiness against her shoulder. Caden looked up at his mother and asked if they could go find the car now. Camille looked at him for a moment, then pulled him close with her free arm and said yes, they could go find the car now. Judge Solomon walked to Harlan and put one hand on his shoulder. No speech, no long moment. Just that, a hand on the shoulder, the way men and families communicate the things that are too large for sentences. Harlan nodded once. That was enough. The termination came 18 days later following a formal departmental review. The review board did not deliberate long. The footage from 19 separate phones, the testimony of Sylvia Jones, the documented absence of any dispatch call prior to the stop, the clean license and registration, the failed search, and the fabricated citations built a case that required no interpretation. Calvin Reese was terminated for conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of authority, and filing a false probable cause claim. But the termination was not the end of it. It was the beginning of a different and much larger problem for Calvin Reese. Because when the marijuana claim went into the official record of this stop, it triggered a review of every prior stop in which Reese had used the same justification. That list was pulled within 72 hours of his suspension. It contained 41 entries over 9 years. 41 times Calvin Reese had written detected odor of marijuana as the basis for a vehicle search. The review board cross-referenced those stops against their outcomes. 37 of the 41 searches had produced no drugs of any kind. In 22 of those cases, the drivers had been cited anyway for unrelated minor violations that investigators now believed were fabricated to justify the stop after the search failed. 34 of the 41 drivers were black. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation within 30 days of Reese's termination. The investigation was not limited to the stop on Aldridge Campus Drive. It reached back 9 years into every case Reese had touched, every citation he had written, every arrest that had followed one of his marijuana claims. For the people who had accepted plea deals on those cases, for the ones who had paid fines, for the ones who had lost their licenses or their jobs because of a stop built on a lie, the investigation arriving this late was both necessary and painful in equal measure. Harlan Solomon, who by that point had passed the Georgia bar and accepted his position at the Midtown firm, was contacted by the DA's office as a witness. He gave his statement. He also, on his own time, and without billing a single hour, began making calls on behalf of 3 of the other 41 drivers whose cases he had reviewed and believed had grounds for civil action. He had spent 3 years studying civil rights law. He had chosen that concentration for reasons that were never abstract or academic. And now, 4 months out of law school, he was already using it. Camille Solomon framed the graduation program. The one Imani had carried through the ceremony and held on to through the stop and fallen asleep with in the back seat. She framed it and hung it in the hallway of her house in Cascade Heights, right next to the photograph taken on the steps of Harmon Hall 2 hours before everything happened. Harlan in his cap and gown, Caden on his left, Imani on his right, Camille with her hand on his back, all of them smiling in the Atlanta afternoon sun. The frame is still there. It isn't going anywhere. If this story reminded you that accountability doesn't come automatically, that sometimes it only arrives because the right people refuse to be silent and the cameras never stopped rolling, then this channel exists for exactly that reason. Hit the like button, subscribe to Deep Truth, and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Justice doesn't trend on its own. You have to push it.